Hi, welcome to another exciting episode of the Andre The Beast Crayton Show. Another exciting show and definitely another exciting guest. Today we have Randy Cusick's wife. The way her name is spelled is Mercedes, but it's Mercy
Mercedes.
Mercedes. Okay,
Yeah.
great. Cusick on the show. And let me tell you where we're going today with this. Your husband felt that you should continue your journey with helping people who are coming out of sobriety or in entering sobriety to understand past, present, future. That's very impactful. And let me use your word, to blossom.
Uh,
With that said, I read your questionnaire. Very deep, almost dark at some points.
uh-huh.
Before we get started, tell the viewers a little bit about who you are. Outside of being the famous wife of Randy, but give me a little
Well,
bit more
actually,
information.
he's also I'm his famous wife too. No. Who I am today is I'm coming up on 19 years of sobriety. I am a mother, a wife, and I have a wonderful, thriving trauma practice focusing on EMDR, and recently got back into jumping horses.
Yes.
So that is kind of who I am in a nutshell today.
What is EMDR? I'm sorry, I don't know what that is.
Thank you for asking. EMDR is stands for eye movement desensitization reprocessing. It is one of the top tier treatments for trauma, and I am a trauma specialist. So it uses what's called bilateral stimulation, and was created back in the East from Francine Shapiro, and it was originally for PTSD for veterans.
Give me more insight. Like, how do you administer this to someone that has trauma? And does the skill set differ depending on the levels of trauma that the person has?
Great question. So I am a certified advanced trained EMDR specialist. I use pulsators, which are across the room, so it's kind of hard for me to grab, which vibrate back and forth. That bilateral stimulation going back and forth allows there's a window to get into where trauma is stuck and stored, which is in your amygdala and the hippocampus. So like talk therapy, you use your frontal cortex. What we're doing right now is frontal cortex, but trauma is stuck and stored much deeper. So this, by using bilateral stimulation, either a light bar, pulsators, or also headphones, you can kind of get in there and heal. My specialties are childhood trauma, narcissistic abuse, addiction, sexual trauma. And so this is a way that people can heal rapidly. People, and I learned it because, well, I did it myself because of my journey of my own healing. And that was one of the precursors for me to become an EMDR therapist.
Let's talk about that briefly. What was your life like growing up as a child?
Well, actually, I had an incredible childhood. I was very fortunate. I was raised by my mother and my stepfather. I believe I was predispositioned for alcoholism due to a lot of my family genetics. I rode horses, jumped horses, competed, as a teen, and that really kept addiction at bay because that jumping horses was my everything. And then so in horses, once you become 18 years old, you're no longer competing as a junior. So at 18 years old, I had to stop riding and having horses. I went to college, and that is when I really started to get involved in drugs and alcohol, definitely rock and roll lifestyle. My first husband managed a very major, very famous band. And so I was surrounded by alcohol and cocaine, and it really just grabbed me. And so in my 30s, it was cocaine and alcohol and a little bit of other stuff. And in my 20s, it was cocaine. And then in my 30s, I found methamphetamine, and that just takes you down a super dark path. So my journey was a lot of addiction. In the beginning, I had a really powerful job in the entertainment industry in my early 20s. And as my addiction got a hold of me, those jobs got, less and less. And I even changed industries because I just wasn't able to sustain the level of being a professional professional that I could under the influence. And, you know, I also got into, after I divorced my first husband, because I divorced him because he was a drug addict. I thought, which was ironic. So he had much more of the problem than me when in my early 20s. He snorted our house, cars, and me up his nose. And I was just like, well, if I leave, maybe he'll stop doing the drugs, because I truly loved the man. He was a great man, but but the drugs were just killing us.
Now, you wasn't participating in the drugs with him?
I was definitely participating, but his level of addiction and mine at that time were very different proportionally.
What do you mean when you say his level? Because to me, if I'm an addict and you're an addict, we're both an addict. It's who can smoke, who can snort the most coke at the
See,
end of the day.
you're right. That's later my life. But at this point in my early 20s, I still could have an off switch. I still could be like, I have an important work event tomorrow. I need to show up to family. I need to whatever that, and I could stop. Now, my
So you was a
ex-husband, on the other
functional
hand,
addict, basically, is what you're
huh?
saying. You was a functional addict.
At that time, it just really hadn't gotten to me, because to me, with addiction, you cross a line. And once once a cucumber becomes a pickle, it can never become a cucumber again. And when I was
When
about
did you cross the
20,
line?
23, 24, I became a pickle, and I can never turn it off after that.
Why do you think you couldn't turn it off?
It's the disease of addiction. It is a very documented medical thing that happens with addicts.
When did you
So
hit you?
people
When did
can
you?
be heavy users, but
Yeah.
addiction is once you've crossed that line and you can't get back. You can't stop.
How did you know you really crossed the line? I mean, because if I'm not, I don't know much about addiction on that level, but to me, do you really know when you crossed the line? Like, did you sell yourself, prostitution? Did you steal? How did you know you started to cross those lines? Because going out and buying it is different. I would think that you
100%.
you would do something that's totally out of character that would let you know, damn, you know what? I'm fucked up. I shouldn't have never done that.
Well, and there's a lot of lines that I crossed that I said I would never cross. And for that was a lot of it was a moral compass for me. Things that I just, if I was someone that was not under the influence, me today, things that I would just never even consider.
Like
And
what? Don't leave me hanging. Don't do
well,
that
I
to
think
me.
a huge part of my addiction was how I felt about myself as a result of being an addict. And so my pickers of men, I was getting into a lot of abusive relationships. I would never have tolerated being abused if I wasn't in these very addictive, toxic relationships. And crossing the lines for me is lying, manipulating my family. To me, there was so many things that I did that I just was like, who am I? I would never do that. I was definitely associated with a lot of people that did like gang members and bikers, very much became more versed in that world, which it was foreign to me.
Did you have children at this time?
No, I did not have children. I thankfully did not have children. I had a child once I got sober, though, thankfully.
Yeah. Now that you look back at it and you crossed those lines, did the fear of disease, AIDS, anything, you're out there just
I would say
reckless.
for me, it was more of killing myself, physically killing myself by suicide. I put myself in a lot of precarious, life threatening situations, very dangerous. That's more the path that I got myself into, being around people that I saw a lot of violence. I've seen things that I should never have seen, and things I've witnessed that I almost was killed for. There was a gang that wanted me dead because I witnessed something that they did. And so I even left the state for a while because I had a hit out on me.
This sounds crazy, but
It is crazy.
where was I guess because you burnt so many bridges with your addiction, you didn't have even a supporting cast to even go to. You hear some people that are
Well,
threatening your life and you got to leave.
yes and no. My family was always there to a degree. And in their defense, I pushed them away. I did not want them to see who I had become. They weren't even sure what was going on with me. I would disappear. There was, a few years that they didn't even know where I was living or anything. So they would they love me. And, when I was ready for help, they absolutely helped me tenfold. But I had burned a lot of bridges, but they always loved me. And if I ever went to them for help, they helped me. My stepfather, oh my gosh, he helped me so much. I financially would get myself in some precarious situations, and he just begrudgingly would send me money, begrudgingly write me a check. And he would just be like, can you get your life together? Like, he couldn't understand it because I was raised with such value and morals and good models of parents. And so he just couldn't understand what had happened to me. He just didn't understand it. And I didn't want to say, hey, by the way, Dad, I'm a raging drug addict. He just thought I couldn't get my life together.
How were you living? That's the thing. What's the life? What is it like to be in your shoes and doing what you've done for so many years? I mean,
Well,
do you wake
again, I
up
was
with hope or do you wake up with the word hopeless?
I was absolutely hopeless. I may have had a roof over my head and food in my refrigerator, but I was hopeless and I wanted to die. And that was part of what got me sober, is wishing I was dead, being so upset when I would wake up, just like, I have to do this life again. I don't want to do this. Trying to kill myself. One time I was trying to get out of an abusive relationship, and my best idea under the influence was to take a mass amounts of Inderol, which is a heart medication of my ex's, lots of alcohol. I came to a couple days later with someone knocked down my door and found me, took me to the hospital, and then they took me to the psych ward.
Hmm.
And the medicine I was on, Inderol, made it so I couldn't speak. So I was in a psych ward, but I couldn't speak for several days as a symptom of this medicine that I took, that I wanted to, I was hoping it would kill me.
I can't even begin to imagine you taking a medicine and not knowing the effects, and now you in a psych ward and you can't talk. What was that like?
It was so frustrating because people made a lot of assumptions, and I would, like, my inside, I would be like, no, that's not right. I wasn't trying to do this. I was trying to do that. I would be wanting to talk, but I would literally be like this.
Did you write
And
everything down? Did you write? Did you use a chalkboard?
I don't even remember that. I don't even remember. All I know is it eventually wore off, and I could eventually talk, and I eventually got out of that psych ward.
What was the first thing that you remember saying when you could get your voice back? I'm not supposed to be here?
Probably something like that. But I will tell you, more than anything, I was upset that I wasn't successful. Like, I was pissed. I wrote a note. My suicide note was, please take care of my dog Callie. And that's really all I wrote about, was my dog. That's all I cared about at the time. I didn't write, I'm sorry to my family. I didn't. And that was one of the things that just broke my mother's heart, because she read my note and there was nothing about, like, my family. But my world was so small that all I could think about was right in front of me, which was my dog Callie.
Ain't that funny? It's so funny. We live in a society to where we're quick to disconnect. This is fucked up to me. People, more so women, and it's usually after they get done with a relationship, they will gravitate to an animal, and that animal replaces human affection. What's your take on
Well,
it? Because
all
now
I
you're
can say is
gravitating
my
to an animal.
Dalmatian Splash that I got after the psych ward visit. She's probably the reason why I'm still alive today. So she literally saved my life. So, there's that.
But you mentioned that the animal somewhat saved your life because you gravitated to it. But this is when does accountability really take in? Because the people that would have been there, that should have been there, didn't want to attach themselves to what they may think could be collateral damage.
Well, I have no problem with my family's distance from me during that time. It made perfect sense to me. I mean, it makes perfect sense to me now as a sober woman, as a therapist. I get that. and thankfully, I hit a bottom, and my bottom got me to where I am today. And I'm so grateful. And I'm also absolutely grateful for the 20 plus years of my addiction because of all the things I've been through. And I have been through a lot. I get to help people today, like it's so crazy. For example, my affiliation or association, not affiliation, that's the wrong terminology, association with a particular biker club, a very dangerous biker club. I have a new client who actually was a hitman for a biker gang, and now he's trying to turn his life around. I know that lifestyle because I was around it, and he absolutely was shocked when I was recommended to him, and I think I was recommended to him because of my history. And he said, I would never have been able to share the things that I share with you because nobody knows that lifestyle, especially a female therapist, and isn't terrified of the things I'm going to say. This is a guy that's killed people. And so I'm so grateful that all my 20 plus years out there, now I get to help people. So I have definitely, I've been a phoenix rising, coming out from the ashes to be able to not only, have an incredible life myself, being married to a great guy, have a kid at 43 years old, have a big career. So,
Let's
things.
let's go back a little bit. And
Sure.
congratulations on that in the sobriety and knowing that you're married to Randy. I like Randy.
Yeah, me too.
But let's go back. How was you introduced? How was you helped? Who pulled your boots? Who got you out outside of yourself? Because it's one thing to tell yourself, I'm mentally prepared to walk away. But let's get real. Are you really mentally ready? Who pulled your boots up? Who was your mentor?
I don't know that I had so much a mentor, but I had a really good friend that was also an active addiction, but she was just a very special soul. So I would say she was a huge part of we both wanted a better life. I also saw a therapist in those last couple years, and it was a therapist that she knew I was getting high. She knew I was getting high probably, right before her sessions. She's one of the few people I actually told about my drug use and the violent relationships. So she definitely was a huge part of trying to get me to make some different decisions. And eventually what happened is I was in a really toxic, crazy relationship. I was coming up on 40 years old. And I was just like, I just couldn't even fathom that I had gotten to where I've gotten, and I had nothing to show for my life. Back in my 20s, I was pretty high up in the entertainment industry. I was one of the highest promoted females in a independent. It was called Hemdale Entertainment, and I was the only female executive. So back in the day, I, definitely was, had my shit together. And when at the end, I was slinging liquor at a dive bar here in Los Angeles. And, I had nothing to show for my life. I just was, it was like Groundhog's Day over and over.
Now,
And
when didn't mean to cut you off, so I'm gonna just ask this question. I'm really big on therapy. I think therapy gives you a chance to really evaluate your choices and to determine whether or not you're doing what's in the best interest of not only for your own mental health, but the mental health of others around you. When you walked into that therapy session and your therapist knew you were still undertaking, still participating in these activities, what was the words that she said that gave you the encouragement to say, you know what, I need to be taking this a little bit seriously?
I don't remember her words. I just remembered that she allowed me to have a safe place to be honest about what I was actually doing. Because there was no one in my life that I was sharing the truth with. So she allowed me, it was a safe place. She was she really had very little experience with addiction. So she didn't really have a lot of resources for me, except for really encouraging me to go to a detox. And so although my how it all happened and how I ended up in a detox wasn't the traditional way by just, willing to go in. But she was absolutely a huge part of that journey. And she was one of my first visitors when I was in detox. She came to visit me.
When you was in detox, how much of a revelation did you have to deal with? We hear people that go to detox and they deal with these, what they call DTs and the shakes and all this. What was that like for you?
Well, how I got there was leading up to like the weeks before I entered detox on a February 12th, 2007. The weeks before, I had a girlfriend who had a sugar daddy that was a shady doctor. And so she said, "Hey, why don't you go see this doctor and to give me medication to get me off the drugs." So I go to his office and he goes, it was basically just to make it look semi-official and ask me some random questions, but he already knew because the girl that, he was taking care of, he supplied her with the drug. So he was not an up and up doctor. That's for sure. So he gave me Xanax. I was coming off at that time methamphetamine, which you don't get DTs from. But so he gave me a prescription. All I know in this 2-week period, it's a blur to me. I slept most of it. I would take the medication. There's a refill in there. And when I would come to, I would take the pill and I wouldn't know if it had been 10 minutes or if I'd been asleep for 5 hours. Part of my history is I have a brother-in-law who's a cop. And based on the type of people I hung out with, we kind of had an understanding. Jose did not come to my house, without, actually, he really never came to my house because he knew what I was doing. We never had that clear conversation, but he's a cop. He knew, but he was always my brother-in-law first. So he was trying to reach me during this time. I was unreachable. Nobody could reach me. And he had a really bad feeling. And at this point, I'm about 2 weeks taking all these pills and he had, again, bad feeling. He showed up, knocked down my door. I didn't answer, knocked down my door, and I had overdosed, and I was barely alive. And he's my angel. And Jose, if it wasn't for Jose, my brother-in-law, who just knew something was wrong with me, I would have died.
What was the reason for prescribing Xanax to get you somewhat of a
Again,
relief
shady
from that?
hence the word shady doctor. I could not answer that question. My family wanted to go after that doctor legally after they found out what happened. And my thoughts was, although it was super shady and I almost died, it also got me sober because that when I went to the hospital and I was in the emergency room soon enough in which I was able to, that I had not completely overdosed and died. I had overdosed, but just hadn't died yet.
Well, congratulations and thank the heavens for your brother-in-law Jose to have the insight to come. And you got to ask yourself, let's look a little bit deeper than this too. Would you have really had a case? You was an addict. It would have been your word against his, and yeah.
But I mean, my stepfather, he's a businessman and was a very big and he wanted to go after him, but I was just like, it's not worth it, Dad. It's really not worth it. And again, it was a blessing in its own way, and it got me sober.
So
Just inches
how
and
was
seconds from dying.
well, I'm glad you're here. I'm glad that didn't happen. So
Me too.
now let's talk about the introduction into this electromagnetic EPD syndrome.
EMDR.
Yeah, how was that? How did that get introduced to you, and how was that instrumental in elevating you to where you're at today and put you on the trajectory to where you're at today?
Thank you for asking. So my first week in detox, I said to my mom, I want to be a counselor. And she just was like, oh my gosh. She's like, let's just get you well, dear. Like she just kind of laughed at me. But that kind of started the thought process. So I was in detox, residential. I lived in what's called a sober living for 9 months to learn how to live sober, was introduced to sober people in a sober community.
Now, hold on a minute. Let me ask this question because I'm going to be interrupting because I'm trying to take my mind into the guest. Now, is this something that is free? Did you have to pay for this? Is this a funding by the state? Because you got other people that probably went through what you gone through, and is these resources available, and are they? Do people have to pay for these?
Well, in my case, the hospital bill, I got a bill at some point for that. I had no insurance at the time. Because that's not something I would have put my money on. But as far as going to like an outpatient residential sober living, my stepfather, he's the one who footed the bill. He said, you know what? He had been helping me out. He's like, if this is going to like save your life and get you on the right track, I'm happy to pay for it. So there are absolutely places that are available, county facilities, sober livings that are reasonably priced. So there's a gamut because I worked in the treatment world for 15 years. So there's county places, which are, basically they're through Medi-Cal or whatever your state funding is, all the way up to people spending a ton of money. There's the $60,000 to $100,000 rehabs that they get paid cash, and if you've got that type of money, then you can go to those type of places. So it's a huge range.
You should be overthinking your mom and your stepdad.
Trust me, I have done everything to thank them in so many ways, and that's called a living amends in my world. I have been the best daughter. I am their well, he's passed now, but I have been there through every medical issue. I have been there for my mother. I talk to her every single day. I cannot thank them enough because they gave me just the step that I needed. And then I had the willingness. And that's the thing is, you can be given a lot, treatment, all these opportunities. But if you don't have the willingness
Mhm.
to pick up the tools, you got nothing. You'll just go be back getting loaded.
Now, let me go
So
here.
I was done. And thankfully, I was very desperate. And so when you're desperate and you want help, you're willing to do whatever is put in front of you. And that was my case. I was willing to stay in a sober living environment for 9 months, which is a really long time.
Now, in that 9 months, were you given the treatment of the EMDR treatment plan?
Not yet. It started more in my professional life. So after I was sober about a year, I went back to school to get another degree and I became an addiction counselor. And so I did that for many years.
You said
And
get
then,
another degree. What was the first degree?
well, I already had a bachelor's. And then I went back and got it's a accreditation in addiction counseling. And then I went back to school again to get my master's in marriage and family therapy. And that's when the whole EMDR thing starts.
Was that performed on? Have you ever had that performed on you? The MD.
So what happened was I was in my studies, getting my master's program. I was in a trauma class because I'm a trauma specialist. So I went to a school that specialized in trauma. They talked about EMDR. And I was like, I need to know more about that. So I found an EMDR therapist who would address my relational trauma, which is all the domestic violence I had been in. So I had been in talk therapy for many, many years and identified patterns and realizations, and it was wonderful. And I have nothing against talk therapy. However, EMDR is deeper because it helps rewire our nervous system.
But
And so
couldn't that also be dangerous? Because opening up Pandora's box with that level of trauma that's been so deeply hidden, it's almost like playing Russian roulette. You don't know what you're going to get and how to
well,
really address it.
that is true to a degree, but as long as you are with an accredited, certified therapist that knows what they're doing, I deal with extremely difficult cases. And yes, I'm well aware of Pandora's box, and thank you for bringing that up. I'm very fortunate that EMDR is something that is really good for Pandora's box. It's a specialized treatment. but you want to make sure that your therapist is certified, advanced trained, knows what they're doing. So if you're dealing with pervasive trauma, anything that's big, childhood trauma, sexual abuse, you want to make sure that that's their main lane. So whenever
Is
I tell anybody that's looking for an EMDR therapist, I say make sure that that's their main thing that they do in their practice.
is this somewhat like genetic hardwiring, like the rolling pigeon theory? That when you're dealing with this genetic hardwiring, kind of like what you was talking about earlier, that you was predestined. So with the predestined, does the genetic hardwiring have anything to do with locking and unlocking those deep trauma secrets that people have?
Genetic predisposition to addiction is a little different. Now, as far as intergenerational trauma, like we all carry our history of trauma. So within my DNA, if my mother had a lot of trauma, which she did not, but we'll say, for example, if she did, and then her grandmother or her father, genetically, I would, from a DNA standpoint, I would have, that's how DNA works. So it's a intergenerational trauma. You can carry other people's trauma in your body.
How does that play into combining, decoding the two? Because we know you got the DNA genetic hardwiring trauma, and then you got what I might call the environmental factors of the trauma. How does let me use these words again. How does the EMDR distinguish the two?
That's a good question. I'm trying to figure out how to answer that in a way that would make sense.
That's why I was saying, like, if it's genetic hardwiring, and I like the fact that this program is available. What I'm thinking is also like unlocking Pandora's box, because I don't really know how far the trauma goes back when we're
Yeah,
dealing with
true.
genetic hardwiring. If you go in there and you start to tinker with something, you may tinkle something
Well,
that was
well,
involved with my
where
great
I
grandfather.
disagree with you on that is EMDR is an 8-phase protocol. It is
Okay.
very much of you do this first, you do this, you make sure that this person has the ability to ground themselves, to regulate. So before you open, quote, Pandora's box, you are, so much of the treatment is to make sure that they can stay within what's called the window of tolerance, that they don't get too shut down or too checked out. And so it typically when people are doing EMDR, they are not just, it's not like a wild, wild west. People come to me and they're like, I had this bad thing happen to me when I was 6, this bad thing when was a teenager. Or the other thing that I get is, I don't feel safe. I don't feel worthy. And so we go back to an early time, say, when, little Susie didn't get picked up from the dance school, and because her father once again forgot her, so we typically EMDR therapists, we have a game plan. It's not the wild, wild west. So the only time that, like people's past come up is when they make the realization of like, wow, my mom also was abused, and that is why my mom was abusive to me. And there starts to be some resolution with that familiarity of like, oh, that makes so much sense.
What are some of when you're dealing with people, what are some of the most difficult challenges that this EMDR, did I get it right?
You did.
Yeah. Okay. I said it enough.
Well,
When you're dealing with this kind of stuff, like what exactly is what's the most difficult protocol?
Well, it's an 8-phase protocol, which means you go in order. You start with 1, you move to 2, you move to 3. Now, what most people think is EMDR, which a lot of, famous people have gone public about their EMDR work. Prince Harry did, Miley Cyrus, Sandra Bullock, but that's phase 4. So that's where the magic happens. So the desensitizing is the big piece. So you take this event that happened to you, that either you ruminate on, I'll give you a great example. I had this client come in. So I do intensive. So people will fly in to see me and just spend like the weekend with me. So I had this guy, he was a brilliant guy. He worked for Google, smartest guy. He had been in therapy for decades. He said he spent $500,000 talking about what his brother did to him when he was 10. So he goes, I heard about you. So he comes into town. We focus on this event that happened when he was 10 years old. Let me tell you, he has talked about this, $500,000 worth, which is insane, right? So we were able to target that specific memory. So this memory, whenever he's thought about it, it's a 10 out of 10. And through the EMDR protocol, we got it down to what's called an ecologically a 0, which is like it's there, but it doesn't have control over me.
It's
He
not a
was
trigger
free of
anymore.
it. And so he was like, where were you $500,000 ago?
Yeah. This sounds
So
almost like the Arnold Schwarzenegger movie Total Recall. You know, you went in and popped the memory cap, and his or her life is a little bit better and more manageable.
I will say, especially because I do these intensive, which is like I'm spending all day or a couple days with someone, people, I can give them their lives back. And so I do weekly trauma therapy, weekly therapy with EMDR, but if the ones that get the fastest results are when I do the intensives.
How much of your life that you look back on, you wish that you had this opportunity a long time ago?
I'm very content with the way my life's played out. As difficult as a lot of those years were, it's also made me who I am today. I'm so strong and I'm resilient. So I don't have any regrets, which is kind of shocking for the life that I lived when I was in active addiction.
What candidate would be most benefited from EMDR treatment? Like, who would be the primary candidates? Like, what should people recognize in themselves to say, you know what, I might need to try this out. I'm suffering from this, that, or the other, because it's not just addiction.
Yeah, well, so it's a great question. And the thing that's amazing about EMDR is it can help so many different people from OCD, depression, anxiety, addiction, trauma. I work with some people that are on stage a lot, like actors and actresses. Performance anxiety is one that I work with, like, with the people that are in the public eye. So there's nothing that I can't do with EMDR. So people come to see me. I'm a trauma specialist. So that's the people that come to me. But as far as EMDR as a whole, it is anxiety, depression, OCD, ADHD. There's like the gamut. As long as you find someone that knows what they're doing and they're certified and well trained.
How does this work before we wrap up? How does this work when the number one topic now all over social media, especially when it deals with relationships, we always hear this word: bipolar personality disorder, narcissistic personality. You know, is this treatable or with this EMDR treatment as well?
Well, borderline personality disorder, the roots of that is trauma. So you heal the trauma and then you heal the behaviors that are reflective of someone that has borderline personality disorder.
Really? There's proof of this, that this works for people that's been diagnosed with this?
With borderline, absolutely. You
Really?
heal the trauma and those symptoms go to a low roar. Absolutely.
So
Now with
help me understand why people who go on the social media, these so-called therapists, don't recommend this to their patients. Because to me, you hear people always, if they're in a relationship, the first thing they say, oh, well, he was a narcissist, she was a narcissist, he had bipolar. I'm thinking, well, if this is such a high topic now in the word of choice in this decade, now you're telling me that this can, and I understand what you're saying, it can be
Let me
treated, but
tell you, people
why haven't they addressed this with these people that's coming?
and I will say, at least I'm not saying for the professionals, but for the regular person on social media, a lot of words get thrown around with a lot of inaccuracies. The word, he's narcissistic. Well, let me tell you, someone having characteristics of being a narcissist is very different from someone that has an actual personality disorder, narcissistic personality disorder. They're light years apart. And I can't speak for those therapists because I'm a trauma specialist. So I know what work. That's my main lane. So I can't speak for the people that maybe just are uninformed or haven't done the research.
How well known?
Very well known. It's been around since again the 80s, and I would say when people find out about it, I have a lot of people that are like, "Oh, my therapist told me I need to come see you to do EMDR." So it is much more mainstream, especially because a lot of, very famous people have talked very candidly of how it changed your life. And so whenever one of those famous people get out there on the internet and my phone just blows up. And so I won't,
Yeah, but I'd
I'll say
rather
thank
deal
you.
with somebody. I don't want people to be starstruck. I would rather know the average Mojo that came to you that I
Right, but I will say
knew.
that those
Yeah.
people bring it to the public eye and then they go do their research. So I don't care how people find out about it. I'm just glad that it's out there. I'm very active on social media, on Instagram particularly. I talk about EMDR, what it is, how it affects the brain, how it helps childhood trauma. So I'm constantly informing people. My platform is to inform people
Well, what's the
and get
downside
out there.
of it? Because there's always that buyer beware. We talked about the good parts. Let's talk about the buyer beware of going under. There's always, just even when you have surgery, they say the risk is blah, blah, blah. This is the fine print. What's the fine print of this?
Well, I would say whenever there is a client that I may have reservations, that means I need to stay in the early phases longer. So that is resourcing, making sure that they are not dissociating all the time, making sure that they're not shutting down. So the buyer beware is to make sure that you have a well-trained therapist. So what happens is, because you're bringing up a very valid point, and one of the reasons why I get on a soapbox on social media to make sure people go to well-trained therapists. There's a therapist that's in my community that she jumps the phases and jumps straight to what's phase 4, and the client's not ready and they have like a mental breakdown because she has done it wrong. She's just absolutely traumatized people. And so I get the phone call that says, "Hey, Mercedes, I have a gal. She's in the hospital now. I need you to work with her. She was seeing this particular therapist." And thankfully, this therapist, I don't think has been practicing much more these days because she has gotten such a bad name. Buyer beware is do your research. Make sure that that your therapist is certified, that they're advanced trained. Ask them about their training. Ask them how long they've been doing it. Ask them if they've had it done themselves. Ask questions. So that's what I would say to anybody.
Okay. Yeah. So we don't have a memory cap. That's where I was going with that. I don't want
Yeah.
my memory cap
Do your
busted too
research.
early.
Yeah.
You know, when the memory cap is bust too early, like you just said,
100%.
how difficult is it to get that person back under control? Because now
Well,
I'm petrified. I don't want to go. You just,
Well,
like I just said
I've
when we
never,
first
in
started.
all my years of doing this, I've never had a situation that you're speaking of because nothing like that's ever happened. The only thing that can be with EMDR, you cannot be on a benzodiazepine, which is like a Xanax um, or what's the other one? Anyway, benzodiazepine, because EMDR won't work. It interferes with each other. So it's not that it will cause any problems. It literally just won't work. So I had this kid come to see me for an intensive. His mom paid for his intensive. He wasn't really invested. I told him that he cannot be on any benzos the day of treatment, and actually 12 hours before he came loaded. What it was just like he was just not able to, it was just worthless to do anything. I just said, "You're under the influence. And when you want to have help and get help, I'm here, but you can't be taking pills before seeing me."
I've heard of this, but I never had a chance to go deep. I'm glad you allowed me the opportunity to come on the show and bring, once again, informative information, because that's what we do here also to the viewers. Let's talk on a little light side first.
Little what?
Let's talk a little lighter now. You do equestrian riding now. You're winning trophies. You a mother at 43 years old,
I
and you're
am.
happily married to one of the best comedians out there, Randy Cusick. What's that like for you now? It's saying like all the pieces have come together for you.
All the pieces have come together. And that's kind of what got me into back into horses 2.5 years ago is I was like, my life was really good. My life is really good. Married to a great guy. And in all the years we've been together for 17 years, I've never been afraid of him. He's never raised his voice. Based on my history, he's a blessing and an amazing man, having a great kid. And he's a great teenager. And a lot of people can't say that. But I was just like, wow, everything's just coming together. My practice is thriving. But boy, I miss those horses. I really miss those horses. And I kind of put that out there energetically and like literally just things just happened right in front of my eyes that I just took the next indicated step. And lo and behold, within like a week, I'm on a horse again. And within 2 weeks, I'm jumping again, which was
Wow.
crazy because I hadn't jumped since I was 17 years old. And so I just bought a horse like a couple months ago. I just brought him in from Florida and I just competed in a big international show. And I mean, I'm an beginner amateur, but we actually won a class, which is kind of crazy.
Moose, is that the horse's name, Moose?
His barn name, horses have two names. They have a barn name, which is Moose, and he's big. He's 17.3. If you know anything about the size of a horse, he's huge. His show name is True North. And I picked that because like True North is your guiding light. And so I wanted his. That's why I picked that as a show name. So he's my big boy.
I'm so glad that are here with us. My hat's off to your brother-in-law for knocking on that door and having the insight to recognize something's wrong. My hat's off to Randy for pulling you into the carriage with him. What's it like being with Randy? Because I can't never get him sometimes I don't know when he's funny and when he's not funny. What's it like to be married to Randy?
He's hilarious. On our first date, he did something just to see if I would laugh. And I think that was like his way of seeing if I was worthy of a second date.
Did you
And that
not?
was literally put his dessert with a whipped cream in his face.
Yeah.
And I thought it was hilarious. And let me tell you, if I didn't think that was funny, we would not have had a second date.
Okay, that's great. I appreciate that. So, how can the viewers participate or get information on the EMDR treatment?
Well, my website is my name, which is mercedescusick.com. My handles on all my social media and everything is Recover, Heal, Bloom. I think it says it right behind me.
Yeah, I'm looking at
And
it.
so that's my handle on everything, Recover, Heal, Bloom. So people can reach out on my website. I have if you want to have a Zoom meeting for free, they can meet and talk and I can see if I'm a good fit. They can ask me questions on Instagram, TikTok, all the things.
Now, do you work with children? And if so, what age? And what should a parent look for with certain signs with their kid that their kids may be having issues that may need the services of EMDR?
That's a great question. I work with older teens, 13 and up. Teen I am currently working with, his father, he's a very violent man and this kid is no longer under the roof of that violent man. So we have been targeting, which means working on very specific memories so they affect his day-to-day life. And so with kids, if kids are acting out in school, if their behavior's changing, they may be getting bullied, really just pay attention to your kid. It's really noticing their change of mood, their depression, their anxiety, and talking to them and finding someone, that specializes in teens that has a knack to be able to see what's going on with them. So I do work with the teens. I'm a big fan of the teens.
Mm-hmm.
Because I like to help heal them so they're doing what a lot of addicts do, just being so much emotional pain that then they gravitate towards drugs and alcohol because That's one of the reasons why I'm a trauma therapist, is because there is trauma at the root of almost every single alcoholic and addict. So if you can heal the trauma early, then they're less likely to be gravitating towards drugs and alcohol.
I appreciate you so much for taking time out to be on the show. Ladies and gentlemen, make sure you subscribe, like, click that button. The life and the life that you can change happens when you click that button. Not only somebody else's life, but your own. This has been another. Notice how I said it. This has been another. You tell Randy I said, what's up? Come to Indianapolis and perform at Helium. Ladies and gentlemen, this has been another exciting episode of the Andre the Beast Crayton Show.